Hi, thanks for joining us. I am Josue Zapata, lead pastor here at Centerpoint Church, and you're listening to Behind the Point, where we take a deeper dive into Sunday's sermon and address questions that you may have about it. Thanks for listening, and we hope you enjoy today's episode.
All right. Hi, everyone. Welcome to Behind the Point. I'm here with Pastor Josue.
Good morning.
How was Father's Day weekend for you?
Pretty straightforward.
Yeah.
I didn't really do anything. I was at church all day.
Yep. We went on a hike on Saturday.
Oh, Saturday,
That was
yeah.
kinda nice,
I guess the
huh?
whole weekend, yeah.
Yeah.
When we usually go on a hike, Matthew and I go, and then you were there. You came, and that was fun. We went
Yeah.
up to Legend Rock, right behind Blue Mountain. So that was cool. It
That
was
was
a lot
cool.
of fun. Yeah,
You guys climbed up there.
almost died. Last one to make it to the top, but I made it. I made it. It was fun. We had a good time. Yeah.
Did you do anything celebration-wise for Father's Day
No.
with your family?
No. My wife got me a little gift and whatnot.
Nice.
A couple shirts and, but no, that's about it. Yeah, that was at church all day and spent the afternoon at the campus home. They had a little thing for Josiah for his baby dedication.
yeah,
So that was
that was
nice. We
sweet.
got invited to that, and that was cool. Got to go spend some time there. Then came back to the office, took a little nap before the evening
yeah.
service, and then back at it.
Yep. Pam and I woke you up, Pastor Pam, and
Yeah.
we were talking.
Came in
You came
slamming
out
doors,
mad.
and I was like, "My goodness, no."
Yeah. Good.
What'd
Yeah,
you
I went
do?
to
Did
lunch
anything?
with my family, so that was nice with just Carrie and the boys. The day before, we celebrated with the dads and my nephew's birthday too.
Oh, cool.
So went
Very
over to
good.
my sister's
Very
house
good.
and stuff. Yeah, it was good. What is your favorite thing you think about your dad?
Oh boy. Well, that's kind of hard. My dad and I did not have the best relationship growing up, so it's a little difficult to come up with something there. But now, I think we have just a phenomenal relationship. And I love the relationship that I have with my dad right now because he is very. I like seeing that sort of the real side of my dad. Growing up, it kind of felt like I was looking at this stoic side of him that I just clashed with nonstop. And so now it just feels like, having been a grown man now, I see my dad for the man that he is, and I understand so much of the generational issues that he was facing as he grew up. And so I guess that's what I would say
You
right now.
appreciate
Is
him
I
more for who he
appreciate
is
how,
and-
like the struggles that
Yeah.
he dealt with, how he managed through them, his consistency to his call to be a pastor.
Yeah.
Um,
You
and
kind
it
of
just-
bond now, obviously, being
yeah,
pastors.
with a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
It's really. I remember one time I went and I preached for him. He asked me to cover for him one Sunday, and then it turns out he was there. And I'm like, oh, okay. So, but that was fun. And as soon as I had finished preaching, like they do their service a little bit different, so he came back up, kind of dismissed the church, but he goes, he's gotten pretty good, huh? Just kind of one of those
Aw,
things. So that was
nice.
very sweet. But him and I have a really good relationship right now, and I think
Good.
I love the relationship that we have. Even yesterday, I texted him like, "Happy Father's Day, Dad. I love you. Hope you have a good day," kind of thing, and he just responded back in kind. And so that's kind of the relationship I have with
Yeah.
him. I still like
Do you
to
parent different now, or do you parent kind of your kids thinking about just wanting a different relationship with?
Yeah,
with
I
your
try.
children
I try
growing
to.
up?
This is gonna sound so horrible, and I don't mean it to against my dad, but it was my dad very seldom, if ever, apologized. There was very few, and not that he was a mean person, but it was one of those like, I'm the parent, I'm right, and I understand culturally and generationally why he would do that now, but as a kid I didn't. And so one of the things I do with my kids is I'm prepared to apologize at the drop of a hat if I need to, because I want them to know, listen, I'm not perfect on this side either. Like my responsibility is to raise you, but I'm learning it as I go as well. So I think that's part of it, but it's not because I don't want to be like my dad. It's because I've learned from him, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So
I love the thing I think I love most about my dad is he's a servant of just even still, like just helps me with things. He's encouraging. He's super proud of me being a pastor and stuff, which is kind of cool.
Yeah.
So he's always like, my boy, like he did this. And even when I worked, like my position when I worked at Cal Baptist wasn't that big of a deal, but I had director in the title. And so he thought I was like this like running the university or something. Like he's a director over there. So that's kind of cool.
Yeah.
Just I appreciate that he's proud. That makes me feel good and stuff.
that's awesome. Cool.
What is your favorite thing? One more a dad thing like specific about Father's Day. What's one thing about that you love most, I guess, about being a dad? You're like nothing.
No, I do. There's like a million things, but so the video that Damien made for the Father's Day thing, I loved it because I think it's true. There are to be seen as a hero by your kids and knowing full well that you are far from it, but for them to still be able to see past all of that and the excitement when you get home, like here I am thinking like I'm just tired, I'm exhausted, I want to sit down, and for them it's like, oh, daddy's home, like like, and that just kind of gives you that extra boost of energy and sometimes I'm just like, guys, I need a minute, please, just let me sit down. But it's just wonderful.
I do the same.
I can hear my little kids' feet running up to the door as I'm like, I can hear it right now just because we have hardwood floors, so you can hear them running. And I know which one's coming based off the sound of the footsteps, and I can identify it. But I love that part of it, to feel needed by them. Like it's an absolute that I have to be there. So that's
cool. Yeah, that's
really good.
I would echo that too. I love when they're excited that I come home. The things I love most now, I know, are just limited to this season.
Exactly.
So it's like when they're teenagers, they're not going to be running to dad's home.
Yeah.
And cuddles and stuff, like just while they're little. It's like
I have to remind myself of that very regularly.
I do too. I'm like, oh, it's not much longer.
Yeah.
Josh is going into kindergarten this next year. He's still little, of course, but he'll just like wrap around me and stuff. But I'm like, sometimes I get tired of holding him. I'm like, dude, you're going. Like, I can't carry you into kindergarten.
Right.
And stuff. But then the other half of me is like, but he's still like, this is my baby. He's my youngest. And so, I love those things too. Damien's a good dad too. I always see him with his little
thanks.
Ones, so. What encouragement do you have to dads? Just thinking, I mean, you kind of said, you're not the hero a lot of times. Any encouragement for dads that just feel like they've failed as a parent? And that's kind of a big question, but do you have to remind yourself of things or things that you even say to some others who have made some pretty big errors?
I mean, I don't be afraid to apologize.
Yeah.
I think kids are super quick to forgive. That's one of the beauties of the heart of a child is that they're quick to forgive. I remember my daughter one time, I made a mistake. I don't remember what it was, but I worded it to her that way, like, Daddy made a mistake, I'm sorry. And she says, it's all right, we'll just erase it. Like, just because for her, it's as simple as like a mistake on a piece of paper. You just erase it. She was just, and oh my gosh, I started crying when she said that because I was like, just the innocence of the heart of a child. Like, it says, okay, Daddy, we'll just erase it. Like, it never happened. I'm like, that is just the sweetest thing. So I would encourage somebody who feels like they've messed up or that they feel like a failure. Just don't expect that to ever go away. It's you're always going to make mistakes.
Right.
That does not mean that you are a failure, though. It means you're human. If you choose not to learn from that, you're going to keep making the same mistake. So learn from it, but don't expect to ever not make failures. I think that's an unrealistic expectation for anybody to put on themselves. So plan to apologize, plan to ask for forgiveness, and plan to learn from those things.
Good. Well, let's jump in. So your message.
When you say good, it makes me feel like I'm answering correctly.
Yeah, good boy. That's that's the right answer.
Yeah.
Every time. 100% correct. So your message was on how to read the Bible, and we talked about the Old Testament. So this is the series that we're in. And so I wanted to get into the points here. Your first point was that we read the Old Testament as a true narrative.
Yes.
And you really emphasized the word true. Mm-hmm. This is a real event that took place. Mm-hmm. I like how you shared, someone called you out before on using the word story too much when you're talking about the Bible or these events. These are
Shout out to Miss Yvonne Buntler was her name. She's the one who talked to me out at Cal Mesa. She's the sweetest thing in the world. She was so kind with the way she talked to me. It was not like a rebuke. She was so kind and gentle with the way she said that. And it always stuck with me. Like, call it a narrative, not a story.
Yeah.
So, it worked.
It's the true narrative. Can you give us just the narrative of Scripture, or even just kind of through the Old Testament? You began to do that up to the point of Abraham, just giving us the beginning. Would you do that? Just aim for like under 2 minutes if you can. If you go, I'm not going to clock you. So if it's like 2:10 or something. But I just, and have you heard the phrase elevator speech?
Yeah.
Okay. So like, just kind of a short summary as
Short
much as you
pitch.
can.
Yeah.
A short picture
Okay.
of God's story, like Genesis through kind of the
Well, I mean,
leading up
there's
to
the
Christ.
sorry, I don't mean to interrupt you.
No,
Good.
go for it.
There's the 4-word description of it. There's creation, fall, redemption, and restoration.
Oh,
That
good.
takes you
Yep.
through the whole thing. Creation, you can start to break that down a little bit. What we see as perfection, that is skewed by the introduction of sin by man, because we choose to be rebellious against God. That's where we see the fall. All throughout all of this, God has a plan for redemption, which is through Christ, which we
Yep.
see all of that builds through the Old Testament, and it comes to a head in the New Testament, where we see Christ come into this world, and the restoration, the ultimate restoration happens. That brings us back to full circle to creation, which is to be restored with God, the regular communion with God as Adam walked in the garden with God. So it's creation, fall, redemption, and restoration. And this happens in heaven.
The restoration,
Restoration.
the totality of
Correct.
it. Yeah, good.
Did I do it under 2 minutes?
Yeah, that was pretty good. You did. I like the 4. You did
Yeah.
that like in 10 seconds
Yep,
or less.
there you go.
You said that we shouldn't turn the Old Testament into just a series of moral lessons. But can we pull moral lessons out of it? So that shouldn't be all that it is. I mean, your point was this is a narrative, this is a true story, and there's so much more that it's telling. But is it wrong to, at times, like, can we learn something? For example, are there lessons from the story of Esau and Jacob?
Yeah.
Jacob stealing Esau's blessings.
Yeah.
And the rivalry between those brothers.
Well, there's a lot of the what's the word I'm looking for? The details in the story that are included for that very purpose. For example, I know you asked about Jacob and Esau, but let me backtrack just a second. Sarah is the only woman of the patriarchs that we're told her age that she dies. She gets a whole story of where she dies. She's the only one. And there's a reason for that, because it helps us understand much more of the value and the importance, the significance of Abraham and Sarah. If we go back to Jacob and Esau, to that point, Stewart and Fee in their book, they talk about the dangers. They're like, this narrative of, they don't necessarily bring up Jacob and Esau, but they talk about the difference between Isaac and Rebekah and how they showed favoritism to their kids. And, one favors Esau, one favors Jacob, and the danger of that. But they're like, that's not why this narrative is in the Bible. In the book, again, is How to Read the Bible for All It's Worth. The reason it's in there is so that we know how the line of Israel came from Jacob. That's what it's for. Now, can we extrapolate the dangers of parental preference to child, to one child to the other? Yeah, it's a bad thing to do. And it's like, and
you can
that's
see the consequences.
correct.
Of the way it
There's
plays
dangers
out.
there and so forth. But the reason we're told that he was holding on to Esau's heel, we're meant to take that and understand the character of Esau or Jacob. Now, does that mean that if you ever have twins, this is how it's always going to be? No, of course not. We're just meant to understand how God didn't do things in the normal, culturally accepted ways that things were expected. God chose to use the secondborn, not the firstborn, which was the norm. And God has a way of doing that through Sarah, through Rebekah, and so forth. Several examples. Women that are barren. It's meant to help us understand that God was in this. He provided the miracle there, and so the story continues. So can we pull those moral examples? Absolutely. But that's not the primary purpose of the text.
Yeah. Why do you think that there's, in the narrative sometimes, that there's not like a commentary on the sin or God's judgment on every time something is not according to his plan? So, for example, in Genesis chapter 2, God creates man and woman, and Jesus points back to Adam and Eve as the model for marriage between one man and one woman. But all of these patriarchs have, or not all, but many of them have multiple wives. How come things like that, God doesn't call that out? Or where there's lies that are told that there's not right in the narrative, God's, condemning of it. Are those things like, how do we read that and still know that those things are wrong? Or how do we kind of get around some of those
Well, the expectation is that you understand it's
Yeah.
wrong. You're
'Cause-
supposed to have a. This is part of why the cultural context is important. So if I were telling a story right now to Damien and I said, "Would you believe, Jeff and I are walking down the street and then he stole this guy's backpack. And so, when we left from there, this happened. Like the point is, I don't have to tell you that's wrong
Right.
because you naturally know stealing is wrong.
Yeah.
I don't have to say, and by the way, that was wrong to do. He shouldn't have done that. The idea is that as we read the text, we know Jacob being called a deceiver is naturally wrong. He is deceptive by nature. That's how he has developed himself. His personality shows that. The fact that Abraham lies to the Pharaoh of Egypt and says Sarah is my sister. Well, it's a half truth. She's kind of his cousin, but or sister. Was he sister? They had the same. No, it was cousin. It was cousin. Anyways, the point is, he says, "Well, yeah, she's my sister," and that half truth is still a whole lie. But Abraham's thinking like, "Well, I can get away with it," and the point is that text comes right after Abram agrees to this call from God. So it's supposed to say, "Here's a man of faith who his first move after this story is to lie." To not put faith in God. That's the greater point we're supposed to be looking at. But we also know we don't have to be told that the lie was wrong. We recognize it by contrasting the stories.
Yes, and to read it in your point that this is one verse in one chapter in one book and one in the
Greater story.
the whole word, the greater story, and so we read it in light of the law and the Ten Commandments and all these instructions that we're given as well.
Yep.
And with it too, there's oftentimes I think you just see the way that it plays out and the sin in it ends up coming with consequences.
Correct.
The patriarchs with multiple wives always goes bad. There's tension between those rival wives and the children born from the different ones. It creates so much tension.
Yeah.
And so you see the consequences play out. The word narrative means, so you're using it as the whole story of Scripture or the whole story of the Old Testament. But narrative also is a genre of literature when it is like storytelling, right? But the Old Testament has some other literature too.
Yeah.
I know that we're going to speak specifically to some of these in coming weeks, but do you want to just give like a little bit of a preview for folks that are reading the Old Testament currently, if they're reading like Psalms, if they're reading the prophetic books? Do we kind of apply these same principles to all of those, or there's some
I think the
some
principles
things that we need to do differently?
I think the principles work in general anywhere you are in the 39 books.
Yeah.
But obviously there's going to be nuances to some of that. So if you're reading what was some of the stuff you said? Psalms.
Like Psalms.
If you're reading through the Psalms, I would encourage you to identify who's writing it. Most Bibles now will tell you this is a Psalm of David, a Psalm of Korah, a Psalm of so-and-so, right? It will always tell you who wrote it and usually what was going on. If there's no information, it's because we have no information. But try to identify, like I love the fact that Psalm 23 was written by David. That's a great example where he wrote those words, "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want," as his son is trying to kill him. Like that's important to know. And you only know that obviously as you begin to study the text, but it's important and it helps us realize what our response should be. It shouldn't be, "Oh, woe is me." It's, I'm trusting the Lord even in the hard times. That's the whole point of, even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, you are with me. But we can't forget that the way that whole psalm starts is that the Lord is my shepherd. So it's not that I'm going through this valley alone. It's that the Lord is guiding me through this valley. And the hope in that entire text is the words that follow, "For you are with me." Like, and so we should read it in that capacity and trusting the context. It doesn't necessarily apply to us right off the bat, but we should read it in the context of getting to know the character of God, how he is with us in seasons of hardship. You think of reading something like Ecclesiastes or Proverbs. These are wisdom literature. Okay, so how do we read through Ecclesiastes and Proverbs? read them for the principles that they are. They're not promises. In fact, that'll probably be a point that I'll make as we get to the wisdom literature. They're principles, not promises.
So generally true if you follow these things.
A
you can
prime
expect-
example is what I did yesterday. I read this proverb for Josiah's baby dedication, the proverb that says, train up a child in the ways of the Lord, and even when he is older, he will not depart from them. Now, that's written as an absolute, but it's not an absolute. It's a biblical principle. For example, the early bird gets the worm. It is a proverb. It's a principle. Does the early bird always get the worm? No. But in general, this is what will happen. So you need to read wisdom literature in that context. Is here are good guidelines to live by, how you treat people, how you talk to one another, whether you pursue wisdom, whether you pursue foolishness, how your outlook on life, whether you have righteousness within you or whether you're giving into the righteousness, quote unquote, of the world or the wicked people, right? And not comparing yourself to somebody else. And so these are all general biblical principles that are good to be read. Was that, what was any other genre you had said in there? Was that it?
I think, I mean, I know that there's some others.
There's
And
more,
prophecy,
yeah, but
I
those
guess,
are-
would
yeah.
be one other.
Prophecy is
So
who's
there's
the
all
prophecy written to.
Yeah.
Jeremiah is a great example. Ezekiel's a great example. Understand who it's written to. That I would certainly recommend read by covenant. I would certainly recommend that. That would be very helpful. But I think a lot of the stuff we talked about yesterday would apply specific for prophecy. Yeah.
So your second point is read the Old Testament by covenant, which you were alluding to there. Are there any tools or hints so we can know which covenant is operating when we turn to like any book? Do you, any way that we would know? So someone, they just maybe they're not going chronologically through scripture or something, and they're just I picked up the book of Isaiah. How do I know what covenant is being?
So you would have to look at the historical context. Isaiah usually, most of the prophets will say who they are preaching to, or they're prophesying to, whether it's the northern kingdom or the southern kingdom. Most of the minor prophets were to Israel. In fact, most of the prophets were to the southern kingdom, which was Judah or Jerusalem, however you want to view that. There are a few sparing ones who went to the northern kingdom. But I would look at that. I included the references in the notes yesterday of where each covenant is established. So Genesis 9 is the Noahic covenant where we see that. Genesis 12, 15, and 17 is Abrahamic. Exodus 19 through 24 is the Mosaic. 2 Samuel 7 is where we see the Davidic. And then, of course, the new covenant comes in as we read through Jeremiah and even into the New Testament in with Luke. So knowing the references is helpful contextually.
Yes. So once you get to 1 Kings, or really once you get to 2 Samuel, the covenant with David, everything forward is under that covenant, like the Mosaic and David's covenant.
Well, there will be overlap.
Right.
Yes, there's overlap.
And so, but if someone's jumping into Chronicles, if they're jumping into the really, the wisdom literature is a little bit different, I guess.
Yes.
But the Psalms and Proverbs, Ecclesiastes would have been written probably in that period. Job arguably was one of the most, the oldest texts, so that's kind of ancient. But then any of the prophets then, right? Am I remembering correctly, all of the major and minor prophets would have been written really in the time of the kings and afterward. The kings.
Well, yes, there's...
and then Ezra and Nehemiah also are at the end.
Technically, Ezra, even though they come first, all of that Ezra and Nehemiah happens after the exile.
Right.
All of that, we see that happen, even though it's coming chronologically.
Yeah. So most of the prophets are before the exile.
Yes.
There's some that are kind of during and post-exile.
Correct.
But all of them still would have been under the Mosaic and Davidic covenants.
Correct.
Okay.
Yep.
One person asked what covenant was in place before David took over. So after Saul. So Saul died and David was in the process of becoming king. Which covenant was in effect then?
Well, the Mosaic would have been in effect then, because it's you have the Abrahamic, and then eventually the narrative continues. Moses comes into the picture. The people of Israel are created by means of their exodus from Egypt. They're known as the Hebrew people then. As they take over the promised land, they continue to grow. Joshua leads them over. They continue to grow. And then eventually David enters the scene, and he becomes king after Saul. Yeah. So the Abrahamic would have still been in effect there.
Okay.
Mosaic, excuse me.
Yes. Now, you kind of answered this one a little bit because you mentioned a moment ago that there's overlap. So does each covenant supersede the previous one? It sounds like not necessarily.
No,
right?
no, I don't think so. There would have been a prime example is God tells Abraham that the whole world will be blessed through him. Christ does not come into the picture until the New Testament. But after the Abrahamic still comes the Davidic covenant, and then we see the new covenant. So there are covenants that overlap in there. The fact that Israel still has a place in the world today speaks to the Abrahamic covenant, that you'll be a great name, I'll make you into a great nation, and so forth. We're still seeing parts of that even today. The Davidic covenant is still technically in effect today because Christ is on the throne as an heir from the line of David. We still see all of that. Of course, the new covenant is still in effect today. The Noahic covenant is still in effect today in the sense that God has not destroyed the earth by means of a flood again. We've not seen anything like that happen. So there will be overlap. Now, are they done for the most part? Have they been fulfilled? Yes, but it doesn't mean that, okay, well, because God hasn't done it now, he can go ahead and destroy the earth with a flood again. That's not what he's going to do. So there will be some overlap, but yes.
Now, can you give a couple examples of reading the Old Testament by the covenant in operation? So what was...
Say that again, reading the Old...
So you told us to read the Old Testament by covenant, right? Can you give an example of doing that? So that's by the covenant that was existing at the time of that book that we're reading, or that chapter or whatever, right? What would that look like Noah before the flood? So there's no covenant really in place at all.
Well,
besides,
I guess there's an argument that could be made that they are under... this is Noah before the flood, you're saying, right? So I guess I wouldn't say that it's a covenant, but it's almost a prophetic nature of what is to come, which is the I'm spacing on the name now.
Are you thinking Genesis 3:15?
Yes, I'm spacing on the name. What is it called? The first gospel.
I don't know what the specific name would be.
Oh my gosh. Look it up for me, Damien. There's a name for it. The very first time, proto-evangelium. Proto-evangelium. That's what it's called. Okay. So it's the very first time the gospel is preached. Yeah. That's where God says to the serpent, and that's what I alluded to yesterday, that the heir of the woman will crush his head and he would strike his heel. So I would think that up until that point, there was an expectancy of this. Well, when is this ever going to happen, right? Sin, of course, runs rampant. Every thought of man is towards sin, and then we see the flood. So that's important to understand. There was no covenant, and which helps us understand a little bit about why the Bible, certain interpretations said that God regretted making man. Right? That, again, no covenant helps us understand a little bit about how God reacts, why he reacts that way. It helps us understand the nature of man. Was it possible that every thought of man was towards sin, as we read in Genesis as well? Well, because they had no concept of it. The fact that Noah alone and his family were the only ones who were considered righteous above the entire on the entirety of the face of the earth is just astonishing. But again, no covenant in place. God had given them instruction: go out, be fruitful, multiply, take over the land, take dominion over it, and so forth. There was none of that had happened. And so we have to see what was in place, what was happening for this to get there. So that would be an example, I guess, of the flood. What was the other one?
One would be like reading a king in say like Second Kings. So for example, like Josiah.
Mm-hmm.
So how would you read his narrative? So Josiah is one of the youngest kings.
Mm-hmm.
He's the last good king of Judah, if I remember correctly. Yeah. And he discovers like the the tablets of the law.
Mm-hmm.
How would you read that in light of the covenant? What kind of are there
So,
specific things we're looking for as
well,
we
it's
read the story?
it's understanding. So Josiah is a excellent example, actually, because he's technically under the Davidic covenant already as a descendant of David.
Right.
He is under the Davidic covenant, so he is the fulfillment of God's promise to, or part of the fulfillment to God's promise to David and all of his
Someone
descendants.
on the line of David is going to
There
always
would be a
on the
descendant
throne.
on the throne. Now, ultimately, that's fulfilled in Christ. But in the moment, we're seeing that through Josiah. But also, what does Josiah do? He's the one who brings reform to the temple because he finds the book of the law. What is the book of the law from? What covenant is that from? The Mosaic covenant. So there's another prime example of how they overlap.
Yes.
And he realizes, oh my goodness, we're not doing our part. The Mosaic covenant was a bilateral covenant. It was a conditional promise, which means each side has to uphold to something. So the fact that God was going to punish the land, but decides not to through the days of Josiah, we understand why. Why God relents when it comes to Josiah's plea to we'll fix this, we'll fix this, we'll do our part, we'll do our part. We now understand why that happens because we can go back to the covenant, the Mosaic covenant, and say, wait a minute, you guys were not obedient to the law. And I love that he says, we've got idols and we shouldn't have them. We've got pagan statues and we shouldn't have them. We've got high places and we shouldn't have them. This is all according to the law that he finds in the temple.
Yeah.
So he goes and removes all. So that helps us understand. The average person might just open up that book and read it and be like, so why'd they do all that? We don't understand why, because there's no covenant context there.
Good.
So it's important to know what the context is. That helps you understand where the biblical narrative is going and why.
Yeah.
Am I answering your question? Okay.
Can you explain a little bit of the difference between like a conditional and an unconditional
Yes.
covenant?
Yes. So it's what's called in theological terms, it's a unilateral covenant, which means it was a one-sided promise. Jeff, you don't have to do anything. No matter what happens today, I will buy you lunch.
All right.
That kind of thing. Okay. Now, this is an example because I'm going to lunch with my wife. So,
Okay.
But no matter what you do today, I will buy you lunch. That's a unilateral covenant. If I were to make a bilateral covenant with you, Jeff, if you can get all of these things done by 12 o'clock and are standing in my office waiting for me, then I will take you to lunch. So now there's conditions
Right,
on you.
right.
So that is a bilateral covenant. The only covenant we know of there was the Mosaic. God says, I will keep you as my chosen people. I'll protect you. I'll bless you and so forth, all the rest of it, if you do this, if you abide by these laws. And that's what Deuteronomy is all about. It's a covenant contract. And it's written in the way the ancient Near East would have developed a contract. They have witnesses, they have a preamble, they have the conditions, they have the blessings, they have the curses, everything. It's all there. It's written in that very specific way. So when you read Deuteronomy, the reason it's kind of dry sometimes is because by all rights, you're reading a contract. You're reading a contract. Who wants to read the fine print, right? But it helps us understand the cultural setting, the historical context, all of that. Really, really rich stuff. So unconditional means one-sided.
Yeah.
I will do everything God says. Conditional says you have to do something as well. Am I addressing both of those for you? Yeah.
So are there can you tell us which ones are conditional and unconditional?
So the ones that we talked about yesterday, the only one that was conditional was the Mosaic.
Okay. Yep.
That's it. Yeah.
Cool.
The rest of them were all unconditional promises. Yeah.
Good. I guess arguably with Christ that we have to receive
Well, but
salvation.
I still, it's a fine line. It's a fair point, but it's a fine line because I think the text that solidifies the unconditional side of it is that while we were still sinners.
Gotcha.
God did not
Yeah,
wait
he
for
died
us.
for us.
Yeah,
Okay.
he didn't wait for us to do the right thing before he made the sacrifice. He said, I'm going to do this no matter what. And that was the new covenant. I guess the to your point,
But there's not a works involved.
well,
I guess,
that's
too, with
precisely
us.
my point.
It's not a keeping of the law.
The covenant was not that we would receive; it was that God would do. So He said, "No matter what, I will send my Son." And even while we were sinners, now the benefit to us is that we receive that salvation. We receive forgiveness from all of that. So I would
I
argue
agree
it's
with that. I
unconditional
think
on
that's
that. Yeah.
fair. Yeah. So your final point was that we read the Old Testament in light of Christ.
Yeah.
And I wanted to see, can you take us through just a few books of scripture, just kind of again like just quick highlights of where we would see Christ as we now look back at the Old Testament.
Mm-hmm.
So where is Christ in Genesis? If you want to just give a few examples there.
Creator.
Mm-hmm.
Creator. He's there. We know that he's there. He's the creator, and we see it obviously in that proto-evangelium that we talked about. He is the seed of the woman. Ultimately, generations later, we would see Christ come from that very moment right there that God promises to destroy sin once and for all.
Good. Exodus.
I looked this up for the record because
did you?
there's lots
okay.
of I don't agree with all of these for the record.
Yeah.
I think there are better examples that we can give, but let me just kind of list some of these off. In Exodus, Jesus is the Passover lamb. That's the illusion that is given there of who Christ is. In Leviticus, I would agree with this. He is the high priest. We have the examples of Aaron and his sons and so forth. But Christ ultimately is our high priest. In Numbers, I love this one. He's the pillar of cloud who is with the people all the time. The pillar of cloud or the pillar of fire, day and night, Christ was with them, correct?
Yep.
Deuteronomy, he's the prophet to come. That's where Moses says a prophet better than me is coming, right? Who is greater than me. In Joshua, he's the commander of the Lord's army. We see this angel who says, I'm neither for nor against, right? And then in Judges, he's the judge, the lawgiver. In Ruth, our kinsman redeemer, and so forth. I mean, we could go through all of the books, but in Job, I love that one. My redeemer lives, right?
What are you looking at? That is that a resource that you can share?
Nope. All I did was just Google Jesus in every book of the Bible. That's it. It's very simple. There's several different versions of this. There are songs that have been made of this. Some of them I might find. Yes, I'll do that. Some of them I might find better examples.
Yeah.
But like for Ezra and Nehemiah, I might try and find a better example of that. But what they offer is the rebuilder of broken walls and lives. Like that's a good illustration,
Right.
but I think I could probably find
someone-
something deeper in there. But I love them. In Psalms, he's the good shepherd, the one who lays down his life. In Song of Solomon, he's our beloved, our loving bridegroom. Isaiah, the suffering servant, Prince of Peace. Those are all excellent examples. And you continue to go through all of them. It's really, really good. I love it. Yeah.
That's cool. I like that.
Yeah.
There's one last question. Is someone asked yesterday? They emailed in. They said, "Did Jesus?" So this was just a miscellaneous Bible question.
Yeah.
And please, if you're listening, send in more too. So if you're reading scripture and you're like, "This is confusing," or have questions, let us know. But someone asked, "Did Jesus visit Hades after the crucifixion?" And I think they were getting.
That's an easy question.
So
goodness,
there's
okay.
in the Apostles' Creed. This is a first century or second, first or second century creed. So there's like a document of what we believe. It says that Jesus descended into hell before he was raised again. But there's not very clear scriptures that explicitly state that. So do we know, did Jesus descend into Hades or into hell?
Will that specifically say that he descended into hell?
Yeah.
No. There's the text. So there's two texts that were included. There's 1 Peter 3:19, which says, after being made alive, he went and made proclamation to the imprisoned spirits.
Okay.
That's first off what it says. But I'm going to read verse 20 just to add a little bit of context. He made proclamations to the imprisoned spirits, to those who were disobedient long ago when God waited patiently in the days of Noah while the ark was being built. So I'll stop there. The next one is in Ephesians 4, and it's verses 8 through 10, and it reads like this. This is why it says, when he, Jesus, ascended on high, he took many captives and gave gifts to the people. And then parenthetically, Paul writes, what does he ascend mean except that he also descended to the lower earthly regions? He who descended is the very one who ascended higher than all the heavens in order to fill the whole universe. So your question is, did Jesus, or the question that was submitted is, did Jesus descend to hell? I have no earthly idea. And I love the way Luther put it like this. He says, a wonderful text is this, and a more obscure passage perhaps than any other in the New Testament, so that I do not know for a certainty just what Peter means.
That was
So
Martin Luther.
this Martin Luther, the
so
reformer.
the reformer, yeah.
And but it's there's truth to that. There's so much truth to just say, I don't know. I
Yes.
don't know. But what can we pull from those texts? There's a lot of it. There's a lot of theories, and speak into this, please,
Sure.
if you got anything to share on it. But there's a lot of theories. Some people would say, let me go back to the text because it refreshes my memory. When it says, after being made alive, he went and made proclamation to the imprisoned spirits, to those who were disobedient long ago. There's several views that say that what this means is that between the time Jesus was dead from the cross and put into the tomb to the day he rose from the dead, that he descends down into heaven, and those that he is preaching to, the imprisoned spirits, some have made the argument that Peter is so heavily influenced by Jewish culture here, books of Enoch, Jubilees, and so forth that reference this material. And this is apocryphal text, by the way. It's not
So
anything
out of-
that's
out of the
it's
Bible.
not in Scripture. That he's so influenced by this that he is saying that Jesus literally went and preached to these fallen angels that Genesis talks about, that the sons of man and the daughters of, how was it? No, the sons of God
Sons
and
of
the
God,
sons of
daughters
God
of
and
man.
daughters of man, that they had relations, and that's where these giant people come from, right? There's those theories. There's the theories of with the people that Jesus preaches to when he purportedly goes down to hell are those who die in the flood, because they were never given a
Okay.
chance for redemption. Now, there's the theory with that is that God will give people in hell a second chance. And so there's a lot of speculation
Yeah,
that
you
comes
could
from
really
that.
go down a
You
rabbit
go
trail.
so far
Yeah.
down these rabbit trails,
Yeah.
and it's just a dangerous thought. What I believe above all else this text means is I can't say yes or no to the question. And if you've
Yeah.
got any thoughts on that, I'd love to hear them. I can't say yes or no that Jesus descended. Some have simplified the thought as to say from Ephesians, what Paul says that he descended and ascended is he descended from heaven to earth, not from earth down to hell.
Right.
And
Sure.
so if he descended from heaven to earth, he is the same one who ascended back to
Right.
heaven. There's speculation as, well, he couldn't have been preaching to the people because it says he preached or proclaimed to the imprisoned spirits. Those could be some of the angels that are being reserved under the ocean until the time of tribulation. There's just so many different
Yeah.
things. I think if anything we can pull from these texts is that God speaks very clearly. We know that. God speaks. God saves, and God is just. We can pull that from all of this. We see, above all else, he ascended to the lower earthly regions, and he ascended higher than all of the heavens. In Peter, he says he made proclamation to the imprisoned spirits, to those who were disobedient long ago. Who those people were, we'll never know for sure, at least not on this side of heaven. We may figure out when we get to heaven, but my best answer to that is I don't know.
Yeah.
I just don't know. And anybody who tells you with certainty, I might just take it with a grain of salt, because there's just no way to know. But the however this goes, whichever direction this goes, the point is that Christ demonstrated, even if there is truth that he went to hell, that he defeated hell, because he went and was
Right.
able to do something that nowhere else in Scripture is it seen. So we know that for sure. Christ defeated hell, he defeated death, he defeated sin, and whatever this looks like, it'll hopefully be made clear to us when we get to heaven. But in the meantime, we can just speculate as to what all of that is. Any thoughts on that?
I don't want to get too complicated.
It's very hard. It is
what I
very
would echo the
complicated.
most, I hope, which is heard the most, is there's a lot of uncertainty, because these are really. I mean, the fact we're not smarter than Martin Luther, the
Yeah.
reformer, right?
Yeah.
So if he said it's confusing, then I think, there's a lot of questions there.
Right.
But there is, in Jewish thought, there was Sheol. It was like a waiting place, almost like where the dead would go until the resurrection. And I don't know when that was formed. I don't know that there's a specific passages in the Old Testament that speak of that very clearly.
Right.
We have in the New Testament, I mean, there's allusions to when Jesus gives that parable of the rich man and Lazarus. And that's not the same Lazarus that Jesus raised from the dead. He's just
Correct.
using a name for this
Correct.
parable's sake. But there's a rich man who seems to be in this bad part of Sheol, which is almost like a hell type place, that he could see Lazarus in the pleasant, like the paradise waiting place, but he can't get to him, and they can't get to each other.
Right.
But there's like, at least in this parable, there's an illusion that there's kind of separated places, one for the righteous, one for the wicked, and you cannot cross that chasm. Jesus says on the cross, when he's hanging next to the criminal who repents, Jesus, remember me. Jesus says, today I'll be with you in paradise. Some argue that that's to Sheol, like the paradise side of Sheol, until the resurrection. Others say to heaven. And the more I study it, the more I'm just like, I don't know, because there's such distinct views. But there seemed to be like a waiting place. And then I do think, was it the Ephesians?
Now that's not purgatory though, right?
Not purgatory. Yeah. We're not paying for our sins
Right.
to get out of there. It
Right.
was just for those who are righteous. I mean, when our eyes awake or when our eyes open, I know without a doubt we'll be with Christ. When we die, we're with Christ. Is that a waiting place? Is that the current heaven? I don't know.
Yeah.
Does that all take place at the resurrection?
Well, I shared this past Friday at a funeral that I did.
Yeah.
And the question was, so what happens when we die? It's like, well, listen, there are 4 passages in the Bible that speak of very specifically when somebody dies, what happens. One is the thief on the cross, 2 are from Paul, and the other one is in Revelation. And all 4 of them speak that when we die, we are with Christ.
Yeah.
Where does that mean? Does that mean right now in heaven? I don't know. I have to believe that that's outside of our understanding of time, our concept of time, and so that's why I'll say at a funeral, we close our eyes here and we will open them in eternity. Does that mean soul sleep? I don't know. Does that mean purgatory? I definitely don't believe so. There are all kinds of different views on that. The one thing we know for certain is that when we die, we are with Christ.
Yeah,
that's how I have to stick with that. That's the best thing I can offer.
The 1 Peter 3:19, I think, is the one that alludes to the most, that there was somewhere that he went to, that he's preaching to the dead, the imprisoned spirits.
Yeah. But there's so many commentaries that speak so differently of it. It just says this is his example, and I don't see any reason why we can't stick with that, and why we need to break down such a confusing text that is not clear. It's what we do know is that this is very clearly Jesus having triumph over Satan, over the demons, over evil, over death, over hell, everything. We know that for sure. Those are the things we can extrapolate from the text, and I think we should hold on to those above all else.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
They always the key to good doctrine is don't let it hinge on one confusing text. Like, let it speak by multiple texts and stuff. And so that area, but how does that change how we live our faith now, our eternal destiny? We know, again, if we are in Christ, when we die, we're with him.
Right.
We know that Jesus, the emphasis is his ascension into heaven. He overcame the grave, whether he was just dead and waiting, whether he went to hell, whether he went to Sheol, wherever he was in that interim period. He overcame death itself. He overcame the devil and sin, and rose to life. The rose to life and what he overcame is the emphasis. Right. The mystery of what happened in that interim period, really, it's interesting. Right. We don't have, we don't have conclusive details there, but it doesn't change like the actual outcome of what we're looking for. So, thanks for the question. Sorry if we just muddied the water a little bit more, but hopefully that gave a little help. Any final things you want to say regarding reading the Old Testament, or any? I would just encourage people to keep emailing in. I am loving. I probably got a few more emails than I thought I was going to last week. So that was fun though, to engage with those and to talk with people and hear the insights that they're sending. So I love it. Keep doing it. And I'm really excited as we continue through this series. I've gotten nothing but really good feedback on this. I was a little worried it was going to come across as too academic, but I'm really excited for the trajectory of this series.
We got 8 weeks left in this, so I think it will be, I'm really excited to see what the Lord's going to do through the series. If you got any questions as it pertains to Scripture at all, I'm not promising you an answer, but I'll certainly do my best to respond. And we will as well on the podcast with any of that. So podcast at centerpointchurch.church if you got any questions.
And our Instagram account
and
too.
our Instagram, yeah. And we'd love to engage with that and wrestle through that material with you and talk with you and help out as best we can.
Yep. Behind the Point podcast on Instagram. Thank you for listening to today's episode. If you have not already, subscribe to our show and leave us a review. It helps us out. We are available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, and our Centerpoint app. If you would like to submit a question to the podcast, just send us an email to podcast@centerpointchurch.church. Questions can be about anything, even a fun get-to-know-you question. We love those. We hope you're enjoying your day. We'll see you next time.